Are you connecting all the dots on the journey to your inner wisdom? Are you looking for a fresh perspective on the messages you've been asking for?
So who doesn't want to be happier, healthier, wealthier, and wiser, and be able to make life's choices with confidence because they finally see the signs? We know you do.
I'm Angela Coulter.
And I'm Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
We're two conscious journeyers dedicated to turning over those rocks and helping you on your personal intuitive sleuthing mission of evolution in our multi-dimensional hologram.
And that includes Earth too.
Yes, it does. Welcome to Solving Me, our conscious puzzle-solving podcast, where we look at the natural relation between your life experiences and their meaning in the bigger picture, from the most mundane to the most overwhelming.
So what do we mean by all this? Well, have you ever thought that getting a flat tire and twisting your ankle could be related? And maybe a message about what's preventing you from getting that awesome, high-paying job you would love. Believe it or not, it's all connected.
Want to know more? Come on and let's get sleuthing. See what comes up in this episode, because it might just be about you. Welcome to episode 18. Today, we're talking about plants and how they provide messages for us in a whole different variety of ways.
Well, and at first when we started thinking about this as a topic, I immediately went to the house plant and that kind of thing. But actually, trees, your plantings around the house, it's more than just, and even plants from the perspective of like the food you consume, plant foods.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
The energy provided by that.
Yes. And so, oh yeah, that's a whole different, oh my goodness, that would be like a food thing altogether.
Right. A food topic.
Yes. The first thing to talk about is many don't recognize plants as having a consciousness of their own, but they absolutely do. They have done there's been so much research done that has shown that there is active consciousness in plants, even though many claim, oh no, like animals have consciousness and plants don't. It's like, no, but plants do, right? And actually they have a much more interrelated consciousness to the bigger picture, like animals do in nature as well. The plants have a much more patient, stable interrelation. So they have sometimes a very, what's the word? Literal message for us from their consciousness that we don't even see. So that's like step one.
Right. Well, and I mean, plants, we talk about, defining whether something's alive, well, it moves. Well, plants move. They respond to the light. They respond to music. I know kids' science projects where they play classical music to this group of seedlings and really loud, heavy metal to this one, and notice the difference in their growths. And plants are alive in that way. They create offspring, and so of course they have their own vibration, their own personal energy field. Yes. For the plants.
Yes. And that's part of why we love being around plants, like in nature often, because they have a very different, without going off too far into a tangent, they have a very present consciousness, and it helps us to remember our own present consciousness. That's one big message that they can provide for us, especially big trees.
Yes. Well, and I watched a flower. I think it was an iris in my garden. And I kept saying, everybody else's irises are blooming and mine aren't blooming. And then boom, all of a sudden it was just there. And it was like this stalk on the plant had one purpose, and that was to produce blooms, and nothing would dissuade it. The wind wouldn't, the dry, the cold, and that plant, that stem on that plant had a sole purpose of producing 4 iris flowers. And it was magnificent to watch and to see the dedication of, this is my purpose.
Well, and that's what a message, right? What a message to help us to remember, look at what focus creates.
Yes. And that plant spent its entire existence, that piece of that plant, visualizing, I'm going to be this flower
Mm-hmm.
and nothing else. And nothing else will distract me and nothing else will get in my way of accomplishing creating this flower.
Yes. And so it's also very interrelated with weather patterns, with what's going on in the whole holistic version of the earth. You know,
Yes.
the roots under the ground. I mean, I always talk about how plants really are all elements because their roots go into the ground, most of them, some of them are in rock, but their leaves are in the air,
Air.
the breeze. They grow from the light of the sun and the heat of the sun, and they need to be watered. And so there you have the four major elements, and then the ether would be their consciousness, which is incredible to see them that way and to see like such wise beings that are. I always say that I think trees are the most conscious beings on the planet because they just are so present, right?
Right.
So,
Well,
in terms
what is that joke that trees allow humans to exist simply to provide them with the
carbon
carbon
dioxide that they need.
carbon dioxide so that the trees can live?
Yeah.
Whereas,
Symbiosis
we of
that we,
course egotistically think it's the other way around.
right, exactly. So, of course, plants have a really powerful message for us because they're a constant piece of consciousness that's in our face all around on any given day. For most of us, I mean, there's a few people that never see plants, but not very many,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
some way, shape, or form. So, what do they mean? It's going to be, again, very individual to the person, or very unique to the individual. But we also put different energies on different plants.
Right. Right. And we talk about poinsettias at Christmas, Easter lilies. There's those that have been pigeonholed into certain times of the year. And Easter lilies, maybe that's where the time when that naturally blooms, but the poinsettias, that's not the case. It's simply the colors represent the tradition of the celebration of Christmas and the season. But we attach so much else to that, like, oh well, we always bring a poinsettia as a gift, and it's then connected to a tradition.
Well, and flowers. And so it's similar to like we have colors, right? Colors of roses all have different meanings, right?
Yes.
Colors of different kinds of flowers have different meanings. Sage is used for cleansing, right? You have white sage, but you also, I mean, cleansing, people use all kinds of sage for cleansing. You have all different kinds of things that they're used for. And that's where we go to herbal use and things like that. So if we have collectively agreed to those kind of representations, then when something unexpectedly pops up into reality, one of those plants, that is something to maybe look at and say, okay, is that saying I need to have a cleansing? Like I always laugh going, we used to say back when I used to do saging or whatever, which I don't do anymore because it's just another tool that, it's just whatever. But it's like if the sage really smokes up, well, obviously that really needed to be cleansed. And if it doesn't really smoke that much, then everything's fine, right? But so what's key is really to look at where your beliefs are around the particular plants. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't, like what they could mean. I sometimes get messages from plants having to do with tenacity and steadfastness and
Right.
like you're talking about your iris.
Right. Absolutely.
But I mean, how many times you see this tree growing on the side of a cliff and you're like, how does that tree even survive? Right.
Right. With just one tip of its root in dirt
Yes,
and everything else exposed.
exactly. And a little flower growing up through a crack in the concrete of a street or something. It's like the perseverance of presence, the perseverance
Mm-hmm.
of steadfastness. And that is often to me what the messages are, is like reminders of
Yes.
what they can represent. And so, yes, sometimes I find sometimes deceased loved ones will give you messages through flowers.
Especially scented, certain scents.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, and while you were talking, I was thinking of tying this back to another episode on allergies. I think it was episode 11. And it's like, okay, so say someone gives you a bouquet of flowers as an apology and you have this allergic reaction. It's like, there's a message.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Or what's irritating you? Or you get a rash from a certain kind of, oh, I just thought of a great example. When we were having a retreat in Glastonbury, there
Oh,
was
right.
someone on the retreat. Remember this? So there was
Yes.
someone on the retreat and we had made it to the last day and everybody was sort of, happy it was the last day, sad it was the last day, so we were sort of off on our own doing different things. And this one person slipped on a hill and landed in nettle.
Yes.
And
Wow.
it was stinging nettle. So if you don't know what that is, it is a plant that you do not want to touch when it is in the ground because it hurts.
Yes. Yes.
And so that evening, this person, when we were having our group thing, she was crying because she was in so much discomfort from that nettle. But what happened was it ended up bringing up a whole bunch of stuff that she had been repressing, that had been processing through in the retreat, but she had been trying to repress because it was too uncomfortable to look at.
And it was a retreat and I'm here to have a good time and not look at my stuff.
And say I have, right?
Exactly.
But it was so productive because the discomfort made that thing that she was suppressing come up, and to a point where it became, a big crying fest and whatever, but it was really powerful for them.
Absolutely.
Basically, it was her expanded self saying, we're here to do this in this context, in this environment. And this is the easiest way, the easiest, most graceful way for you to process it. So you better let it up. So let's create the situation to
We're going to
it.
use this plant to push you to that place.
So what a great blessing it was.
Absolutely.
And this individual looks back and says, oh, I'm really actually really glad that happened because it did force something up that I hadn't been letting myself look at. So plants, I had the same thing happen with me with poison ivy years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have that poison ivy story.
And so when that happens, again, it's taking the blame out of the plant itself and looking at saying, if evidence is having evidence of wanting, right? Yes. As we say at every episode, pretty much. Then why did I put that there? Like, what was it to stop me from doing? What was it to change my direction on? What was it that was that I was doing, or that might have been causing irritation under the surface that I've been repressing, that this forced it to the surface? Because plants have that patient consciousness.
Absolutely. And even if it's a question of, like we just talked about with the car, it's like, nope, I'm going to stop you in your tracks right here. With poison ivy, it's like, you can't touch somebody. You can't be around them. You can't, you're kind of a captive audience to your symptoms until that gets beyond a certain point.
Yeah, I had my thing with the last bout of poison ivy I had was really an intense journey. It was pretty bad. And I remember getting the guidance of, you're just going to figure this out.
And I'm going to hold you here till you do.
And it did. And I was kicking and screaming and angry and crying and everything until I finally was like, well, if I'm not going to get through this, I better stop having my temper tantrum and start looking at it. And as soon as I did that, things started to lighten up and shifted and calm down. Yeah. And so I came to a huge gratitude for having that situation and the ability to force me into seeing that what I needed to see and getting the clarity.
And just
Um,
out of curiosity, have you had poison ivy since then?
no,
Isn't that interesting?
no, although I've just avoided it.
But it also may be that you're no longer needing to have your messages that way.
Well, that's true. Although, just as a precaution, whenever I come across the poison ivy, I make my husband take 4 grocery bags and run them around to put it in the trash because I don't even want to come close to it. But I thank it from afar, and I don't vilify it if it's not in my path of some place where I'm gonna, like have to walk through it every day. Then I just sort of let it be because it too has its own purpose. So yeah, so that's the thing for plants, and it's again, it's as with everything else. What might I not be seeing that this plant is so patiently and consciously showing me without judgment? Because plants have no judgment; they just are. They just
Right. Yeah. I know I went through a phase of really being attached to my garden, and I'm going to grow my food, and I'm going to nourish myself through the garden. And it's like, well, the bugs had a different idea, which, yes, bugs are another messenger. And we're going to talk about that in another episode coming up. But it really turned into a lesson in nourishing myself and how I was looking in all the wrong places for nourishing myself or how to nourish myself, what I considered nourishing.
yeah.
And that was really that was a long summer. We'll put it that way.
Well, and then you have other situations like, how about you planted something like strawberries or blueberries or blackberries and you never get them because the animals always do. So you're sacrificing your own potential food for the animals around,
Or
right?
your own sweetness in life,
Mm-hmm.
because those are the sweet things.
I had come to the place of they can have theirs and I can have mine, and there's plenty for all of us.
Plenty for everyone.
Plenty for everyone. So that's if you have some kind of irritation with even weeds, things that we consider weeds, right?
Oh, right.
You
Right.
know, and it gets overtaken by weeds. What do you feel like is out of control? Like,
Right. And I've come to a whole different appreciation for dandelions.
oh, well, they're an herb, so
Well, and at the same time, when I find them in places that I don't want them, which is what typically people define a weed as, is I realize that they're there because the soil needs them,
Mhm.
and that what they give back to the soil is what why the plant is there, because the soil is missing something. So if
Right.
I simply replenish that in the soil, which in this case, calcium. So if I put my eggshells and I place them where it's abundantly full of dandelions, I'll move them on to the next place
Right.
without having to spray weed killer, without having to. And again, it's just that different connection and different way of looking at the message. To me is I don't have all the information all the time. So let me stop and look at that and find, where am I missing? Again, I felt that to be a very nourishing adventure, to
Mhm.
see how I could be nourishing all aspects of myself differently.
Yes, and if you have a plant that has a certain representation to you, right? So if it's a money plant, a lucky bamboo, all that kind of stuff, and say, I can't keep this kind of plant alive, then maybe there's something in there energetically if that's the energy that that plant's holding for you, right? So there's a
Yes.
lot of different ways of looking at that.
Yes. And I know that when my parents moved in with me and my mother brought all her plants, and it turned into, oh wow, now I'm keeping that alive because that was my mother's plant and she'd had it for 50 years, and I had to do. And then the trauma of oh, it has bugs, or oh, I've overwatered it, or oh, I've killed it. And that was definitely something that, looking at that relationship with my mother, where where am I taking up causes that were hers simply because she was my mother, not that they weren't personal to me. And it just lots of messages in there.
Yes. So step back from just it being a green thing and from saying, oh, I have a black thumb. I've heard people say that, and I'm like, well, then maybe there's something you need to look at about nourishing and nurturing and yourself, because it's just another facet of you, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So, lots of food for thought, and I'm sure we'll be back to this topic, but this is a place to start and look at how plants have a place in your reality and what they might be saying to you. Thanks for listening to us on Solving Me. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure to subscribe so you get notice every time we post a new episode.
And for a short time, we have a special bonus for you. Go to solvingme.net to download your free ebook, which outlines the next level of conscious solutions for your inner investigation.
Be sure to help us spread the word. Share us with others you know who want to solve the puzzles of their everyday life through the filter of expanded consciousness and have fun doing it.
One more thing. Do you have some puzzling life circumstances where you feel blocked and you'd like our take on what's going on? Send us your conscious puzzle at connect@solvingme.net, and maybe you'll be the topic of a future episode.
Until next time, happy sleuthing.